All right, folks. Good morning and welcome to the St. Albert Business Breakfast. Looking around at this incredible group of people here this morning, we might have to start calling this the Breakfast of Champions. Though I'm sure Wheaties might have something to say about that. All right, shifting to someone who will definitely never be on a Wheaties box. Hi, I'm Mike Erickson, and I'm the director of the city's Economic Development Department. It's my privilege to serve as your host for today's event. To our returning guests, thank you for joining us year after year. For our new attendees, a warm welcome. We're so glad that you came. It's always my pleasure to see so many business and political leaders, community champions, and civic partners from our city and around the region gather at this event. Today, we'll share some local economic insights, some business highlights, and of course, a little well-deserved self-promotion of St. Albert. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis peoples. As Treaty people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, we share the responsibility for stewardship of this beautiful land. Before we get too far into our program, I have a few necessary duties as MC. In the very unlikely event of a fire, please exit from the doors in which you came in. Washrooms are located directly behind that curtained off area over there, to my left, your right. Our caterer this morning is Sawmill Banquet and Catering Services. I'd like to thank them for putting the breakfast in Business Breakfast, so join me in a round of applause. And thank you to Cine Audiovisual for helping to make everything look and sound so great this morning. Thanks, gentlemen. I'd like to take a moment to recognize the team at QuadReal. QuadReal is a global real estate company headquartered in Canada. Today we're here in their newest Class A industrial building in their top-tier, master-planned Anthony Henday Business Park. It's been incredible to watch the success of this park. To date, over 1.3 million square feet of industrial space has been built, and it's now home to 4 key St. Albert employers. We're extremely thankful to QuadReal for once again graciously allowing us to make use of one of their buildings for this event at no cost. And here to say a few words on behalf of QuadReal is Megan Kinney, Executive Vice President Leasing. Please join me in welcoming Megan to the stage.
Mike gave me a promotion. I'm the VP of Leasing. So thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Thank you to the City of St. Albert team for the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of QuadReal Property Group, and welcome all of you to our latest development here at Anthony Henday Business Park. As Mike alluded to, we manage a diverse portfolio around the world, approximately 89 billion in assets under management, across Canada, the US, the UK, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Political instability, market fundamentals, red tape reduction, development costs, and permitting processes. Each of these contribute to whether an investment moves forward. Building an industrial park of this scale takes great partnership with the municipality to see it to completion. The building we are sitting in is a LEED Core certified 253,000 square foot cross-dock distribution facility known as Building 2B. Upon completion of Building 3, planned for our remaining vacant parcel across the way, Anthony Henday Business Park will consist of 1.5 million square feet of institutional grade industrial real estate, a significant contributor to the diversification of the tax base for the City of St. Albert, and a success story for both the city and QuadReal. The City of St. Albert has been here every step of the way with us and our tenants. Thank you to the city for your continued partnership, and thank you all for being here today. Back to you, Mike.
I'm going to be handing out promotions to all of our speakers today, so just everybody be prepared. Megan, thank you to you and the team at QuadReal for your continued investment and belief in our community. We appreciate it. And if anyone's looking to lease 253,000 square feet, please give Megan and her team a call. All right, This is an incredibly exciting time for St. Albert. Today, you'll hear from our speakers about our recent unprecedented growth, generational investments in the future of local employment, and continued work to establish ourselves as Alberta's best mid-sized city for investment. We're on the cusp of a major shift in St. Albert's trajectory. Many of the city's long-term plans and strategies, which were once thought to be far off in the future, are now becoming a reality. If only there was some way or someone who could share more about the future of St. Albert. Bringing greetings on behalf of St. Albert City Council, here, back from the future, is Mayor Cathy Heron.
Yes, you can all get pictures with the DeLorean later on today. I know there'll be a bit of a lineup. Yeah, it's the flux capacitor. So it's always fun to do something special when I step on the stage, and that was probably one of the best. I'm sure you're excited to see me, but more excited to see the car, so I've been upstaged. So good morning. My name is Cathy Heron, and I am proud to serve as the mayor of the city of St. Albert. I'm going to move this mic. I've got my city council here today. I've got Councillor Ken Mackay, Councillor Wes Broadhead, Councillor Shelley Bermansky, and Councillor Mike Killick. I was also supposed to introduce some dignitaries. I do not see Mr. Dale Nally. Dale, are you here? Unfortunately, he could not join us, but I do have to introduce the Executive Director of the St. Albert Community Foundation, Jen McCurdy. Where are you, Jen? She's surprised that we're introducing her. And we got Sanetta Vargas from the Government of Alberta. Are they in attendance? Oh, there, thank you for joining us. Awesome. And not on my list, because he's shy, I'd like to introduce our city manager, Mr. Bill Fletcher. Stand up. So as you can tell, today we're talking about the future. And we're not talking about 20 years, 10 years, or even 5 years from now, because the future is here. It's right now, and it's in St. Albert. At the beginning of our term, City Council put together a strategic plan to guide our work over the 4 years we were in office together. Like councils before us, we have visions of what our city can become. Council's strategic plan has 5 overarching priorities: economic prosperity, a vibrant downtown, community well-being, adapting to a changing natural environment, and being financially sustainable. We've made a lot of progress within our plan, but outcomes like these don't happen overnight. Many of the decisions made are far-reaching and create a positive impact far beyond our council term. This year's decisions, over a decade in the making, are coming to fruition. Economic prosperity is a significant priority for this council, as we support an investment-positive environment that encourages economic growth and the development of new and existing sectors. In 2024, our industrial surge continued, with over 38,900 square meters added. So in just 7 years, St. Albert's industrial inventory has increased by over 171,800 square meters. That represents 40% of the city's entire industrial inventory, and QuadReal's Anthony Business Park has been leading the way. For the past 2 years, we've been fortunate to host our business breakfast in QuadReal's wonderful facilities. Last year, we spent the morning next door celebrating our collective successes, and a few months later, we were excited to announce that Rays Athletics was moving in. Anthony Henday Business Park and St. Albert's overall draw to business continues. Investors and entrepreneurs, we're building an infrastructure that is drawing significant innovation and talent from across the region and the country. And the best is yet to come. For Council, our #1 objective is to advance the development of Lakeview Business District. This year, full stop. Over a decade in the making, and Councillor Broadhead will attest, and spanning several councils, the 242-hectare light to medium industrial hub in West St. Albert is now poised to make significant progress. In January, Council approved almost a $63 million investment in front-ending the servicing of Lakeview to accelerate the investment readiness. This decision shows our unwavering commitment to economic growth along Ray Gibbon Drive corridor, development of new and existing sectors, and creating St. Albert's newest industrial area, one of the largest in the Edmonton region. And in a few short months, we will have an exciting announcement to share. This is what the future of Lakeview looks like. A significant employment district that will bring an estimated 5,000 new jobs to St. Albert, $1 to $1.5 billion in investment at full build-out, which will help ensure the long-term financial sustainability of our city, and home to forward-thinking industries like advanced manufacturing, clean tech, logistics, transportation, and life science. And the future is now. When you all entered in, I just was super proud. Edify did a huge highlight on Lakeview Business District, so I think there's a few copies there. It's out tomorrow. I'm wearing the exact same outfit just to highlight it. But it was really nice that Edify noticed that St. Albert was worthy of this big feature. It's the first time St. Albert has been featured in Edify, and it's really highlighting that this is a game changer for not just St. Albert, but for the entire region. It represents a culmination of significant investment and contributions, not just by the City of St. Albert, but also by the Government of Alberta, Council, of course, supporting it through borrowing, and a lot of work from our planning, our economic development, and our engineering departments. We are all, as you can tell, quite excited. Like many of you, when I see the DeLorean, the Back to the Future movies comes flooding back. In the first movie, Doc Brown and Marty are heading back to the future, and Doc says, "Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads." Well, let me tell you, Doc was wrong. Twinning Ray Gibbon Drive has been essential to the growth we have seen in the western part of our city. It has played a key role in attracting significant private investment to Anthony Henday Business Park, and I expect it to play the same role in Lakeview. The city has partnered with the Government of Alberta on a cost-sharing agreement to twin Ray Gibbon Drive. Supported by the province, this was vital to make this project a reality. The first two phases of Ray Gibbon twinning are complete. The next two phases are planned to begin this year and will be completed in 2029. Once Ray Gibbon Drive is eventually connected to the North St. Albert Trail via the new road we're calling Fowler Way, the northwest of St. Albert will be highly connected and serviced. I want to express my gratitude to the Government of Alberta for their partnership and the strong support on this vital infrastructure project. Ray Gibbon Drive is not only fueling growth and creating jobs in St. Albert, but it will benefit the entire Edmonton metropolitan region. Over the last year, St. Albert has continued to see significant growth in business community with a 13% increase in the number of business licenses over the previous year. Fostering growth and ensuring we are business and development friendly are mainstays in everything we do. This is demonstrated by our enviable development and building permit processing timelines, some of the fastest in the province. We approved the St. Albert West Area Structure Plan, updated our land use bylaw regulations, and are expediting responsible development while removing red tape and unnecessary barriers to ensure we are meeting the needs of the business community. Our efforts to attract new investments, support startups, and support retention and growth of existing businesses are having a positive impact on investors and entrepreneurs. Late last year, the Globe and Mail ranked St. Albert as the 10th most livable city in Canada for entrepreneurs. A thriving economy, good infrastructure, networking opportunities, accessible transportation, and supportive business environment are the qualities entrepreneurs look for in a place to call home. And our city fits that bill. The Globe and Mail's ranking gives credence to our continued hard work, and I'm excited to see the significant strides we make with non-residential growth this year and beyond. Just as important as economic prosperity and non-residential growth is the creation of an inclusive community where everyone has an opportunity to fully participate and feel welcomed. This is a powerful relationship between where you work and where you live. In the most recent census showed that more people are living and working in St. Albert than ever before. up 5% from 2018, and in a few short years, Lakeview Business District will be a major employer to our city. It is vital that we support the development of a variety of housing choices for all ages, which are located close to where people work. 2024 was a record year for residential construction in St. Albert. At just over $381 million in residential building permits construction values. Of that, over $211 million were for multifamily projects. The communities of Choureau, Ville-Giroux, and Riverside are rapidly growing, providing future residents of St. Albert with an abundance of housing choices right on the doorsteps of Lakeview Business District. As mayor, I am extremely proud that we are building a community that people want to live in and move to. The most recent municipal census shows that St. Albert's population grew over 72,000 people, with 2024 having the highest growth rate since the early 2000s. Every person who moves to St. Albert is making a deliberate choice to call our exceptional community their home. The Globe and Mail also named St. Albert one of Canada's most livable cities, ranking it second in Alberta and 25th in Canada. And we did beat Edmonton. Our areas of strength continue to be safety for our community, access to healthcare, household income, and employment. We also continue to focus on the development of mixed housing, which increases density, affordability, and provides housing options for all age groups. St. Albert is a growing community. Through strategic investment and long-range thinking, we have opportunities knocking at our door. We are the envy of municipalities in Alberta and now across Canada. Just like in Back to the Future, key moments in our past have altered our future, and we have put us on the path to outstanding success. Some of those decisions were over a decade in the making, while others a few years ago or even a few months ago. This morning's theme, "The Future is Here," is extremely special to me as we begin to fully act and realize on the incredible potential that St. Albert can be. We are attracting investment, creating more jobs, and tackling affordability to maintain our high quality of life. We are one of Alberta's best mid-sized cities, and we are working hard to offer a more complete community where people of all ages can find what they need to call home right here in St. Albert. The future is here, and all of you are a part of it. Please talk to our economic development team to explore the opportunities that you can benefit from and your business. And I want to send a heartfelt thank you to everyone in the room for attending today. I think it's a record attendance, and I'm just really happy to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Herron. The future certainly is here, and we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be at this moment without the determination and commitment and vision of Council. So thank you very much. As Mayor Herron highlighted, Council has made bold decisions and strategic investments that send a clear message to business and private industry that St. Albert takes action. St. Albert makes investments that benefit our local economy and paves the way for economic prosperity. So once again, thank you for your leadership on that. Our next speaker this morning is Patricia Nickel, Manager, Investment Attraction and Growth with our Economic Development Department. Patricia's team works to attract new businesses and new developers, big and small, to St. Albert. From retail to office to industrial and beyond, they bring new shopping offerings and new employment to St. Albert. Help me in welcoming Patricia to the stage.
I think I heard a little cat call out there. That's not appropriate. What a great looking crowd. Thanks for having me this morning. For those of you who don't know me, I am Patricia Nickel, and I'm the Manager of Investment Attraction and Growth for the City of St. Albert. This morning, I'll be sharing some inspiring details that capture the tremendous growth that our city has been seeing, from residential to commercial to industrial. They all play a big role in driving our successes to date. I guess I need this. There we go. So when you think about what makes the city successful, there are a number of characteristics that can define how that's measured. But if the metrics for achieving that success were having award-winning builders that attract new residents by providing a mix of options, or creating an ecosystem that supports development and entices commercial and retail sector, or maybe it's by cultivating a community that is widely sought after by investors and developers. If those were the metrics, then I'd say we have that in spades. With those drivers in mind, we are very pleased to see that there has been a positive shift in our local employment sector, with over 41% of the city's eligible workforce now working in St. Albert. This is based on our recent city census data. This trend is likely due to the increase of businesses that have opened in our community with new change in clusters or occupations within those different sectors. But this clearly states that St. Albert is no longer a commuter city, and residents are able to actually work in the city where they live. Now this slide is going to take some of you by surprise. Our construction permits tell an incredible story that helps support the growth that we've been seeing. We've had unprecedented permitting numbers over the last 12 months, with 64% increase from last year, and that's 48% greater than our all-time high that we had in 2017. That equates to $425 million in investment. Yep, $425 million. Let that sink in. These stats not only show that we are seeing greater interest from developers and businesses, but that there is steady confidence in our city, indicating that we are a thriving city. On the residential side, we also continue to see an increase in building permits, with townhouses, condos, and apartments that have seen the most growth, with affordability probably being one of the drivers. Even with the number of new units coming online, vacancy still remains low, and solid absorption is being realized. This slide represents the growth areas in our city for residential. As shown in our permit numbers, we've had close to 1,300 new starts in 2024. And that's certainly keeping our planning development team very busy, let me tell you. The rental housing market has surged, with notable growth in North Ridge, Riverside, East Village, and of course, Ville-Giroux, which are driving the rental growth, primarily through apartments and row housing. The condo market continues to see an increase, with new product coming online in Midtown, with 100 new units planned, and 50 of those are rental. And of course, Riverbank Landing, with their 14-story tower inching closer to completion. Single-family dwellings also continue to grow in Riverside, with Jensen Lake, Choureau, and Riverside suggesting there is still a demand for owner-occupied homes. Office space, there's going to be a trend here, folks, is also low. There's a spattering of small office space around the city. Comparatively, Edmonton's office vacancy sits overall at around 19.4%. Obviously, their downtown is experiencing a higher rate at 21.6%. Overall, data is showing that suburban areas around the region are at 15%. But St. Albert, we're sitting below that at an average of around 10%. We've also seen an increase in businesses who are locating their head offices or satellite offices here, and most recently that is evidenced by Canada ICI. Some have mentioned it's for the safety or convenience for their staff, and some have mentioned it's because of lower lease rates. With the drive times to St. Albert not a substantial barrier due to the connectivity with the Henday, there are growing opportunities in our community for quality suburban office that have nearby amenities. The commercial retail sector, again, no exception to the growth that we're seeing. We saw an increase of close to 50% in commercial permits over the prior year, with new construction and then the improvement investment on the construction split 50-50. However, with the increase in commercial growth last year, we are still sitting low on new product, with the average available space and occupancy just at 2%. But the good news is we have approximately 30,000 square feet of commercial currently underway and almost 75,000 scheduled to start this year. Commercial interest in St. Albert is very, very strong right now. With our growing population top of mind, businesses and franchises are actively seeking out opportunities to be in St. Albert. We are seeing targeted investment and interest from various food groups, retail chains, and sports and entertainment groups, as evidenced by Rays Athletics. As more people migrate to the region and to St. Albert, we will continue to see a demand for housing density with a mixed-use component for supportive retail. 2024 saw a number of new businesses call St. Albert home. A few that stand out, although all of our businesses are important, of course. Just mentioned Rays Athletics. This is one of the largest pickleball facilities in Canada, and they chose St. Albert. They have really transformed the building that we sat in a year ago at this same event and are really providing a unique space for a variety of sporting activities. New food groups include Hathaway's, Argos, Wild Roots, and Triple O's. Le Depierre is a popular sweet franchise, mouth twister, from Montreal that has opened up their location. And Urban Kids and So Pretty Caracotta also expanded their Alberta franchise to our fair city. We are also equally excited about the new franchises that will be joining our community in the very near future, some sooner than later. Waves Coffee, H&W Produce, just recently announced, Loca, Chick-fil-A, Wendy's, Wayback Burgers, Tutti Frutti, and of course, Chipotle. We are always on the hunt for new businesses, though, and these represent some of the food groups and retailers that are currently on our radar list, some of which we are already in discussion with. And Mayor Aaron, I think you noticed one on there that's still there, Harvey's. We will get it, I promise. If it kills me, I'll get it. Some of which we're already in discussions with, and some that we're still pursuing. I'm sure that our residents would be extremely happy with even just a handful of these that if they came to our community. And I'd like to take a quick moment to recognize a few of our businesses that are getting a little extra attention these days. Priya Windsor, owner of Compass Chocolates, is no stranger to our business breakfast as she shared her story with us a few years ago. She is now competing in an international baking show that started airing in March. If successful, she will win a cash prize, be featured in Food Network magazine, and take home the coveted title of Spring Baking Champion. Now, I've watched 3 episodes now, and she is still in the running, so I'm excited to see where she's going. Tu Lee, the owner of Jack's Burger Shack, will be competing in the Hot and Juicy series Big Burger Battle. That's a mouthful. Chefs are tasked with using mystery ingredients to create the best burger. And again, up for grabs is a cash prize and the title of Big Burger Battle Champion. Their first episode airs in a couple of weeks. And we have something in common with the Ridge Social Eatery. They were also highlighted in the January issue of Edify magazine. This article gave kudos to their amazing food and drink options, but specifically mentioned their loaded chicken quesadillas, which sound pretty amazing, and gave a big 2 thumbs up for their old fashions. Sounds like a good place to be. And finally, I'd like to recognize Orion Plastics, who has been a big presence in our community and are celebrating their 25th anniversary. Orion has had an amazing story, with some of the highlights including the change in ownership that occurred in 2014 that brought Stephen Moore to the helm as the driving force of their operations and delivery, and the delivery of their remarkable products and stellar customer service. In 2017, Orion opened their new facility in St. Albert, with their first big project was a partnership between Orion, Great Canadian Solar, and NMAX, and that brought one of the largest solar arrays in the region. Their mission to revolutionize the future of plastics has only just begun, so congratulations to Stephen and team, and we wish them all the best in successes in the next 25 years. Now on to industrial development. As Mayor Herron mentioned, the city has brought to market an additional 420,000 square feet, I'm using feet, sorry, in 2024. This puts St. Albert now at just over 5.5 million square feet of industrial space. Who knew we actually were an industrial community? With over 280,000 square feet still sitting vacant. That equates to approximately 5% vacancy. So to put that into context, once the building that we're sitting in today is fully leased out, which is demisable, by the way, we will have virtually no industrial space left in St. Albert. Is that an obstacle or is that an opportunity? Let me present you Lakeview Business District. And for those of you who have not heard of Lakeview, perhaps you're still stuck in that time machine over there, this will be one of the region's largest and newest light to medium industrial parks, with the potential of bringing an anticipated 5,000 jobs to St. Albert. This 600-acre industrial development not only has access to major transportation routes and boasts a thriving business environment, but has a strong employment base and a competitive non-commercial tax rate. Not to mention it sits on the banks of the beautiful Lois Hole Provincial Park and Big Lake. Lakeview also sits adjacent to an abundance of mixed housing options to the north, Chauroux, and to the east, Sidex, Ville-Giroux. We have been in discussions with a few developers who have expressed keen interest in Lakeview for future industrial, noting some of the benefits they see for both business and employment growth. The natural areas, as well as the planned amenity site that will be located in the Chauroux neighborhood, will bring a uniqueness to this business park that is unparalleled in the region. Come on. Little shameless plug there at the end. Lakeview has been in the making for many years, and I know that has been mentioned a few times today already. Its future holds great importance for our businesses as well as our community as a whole. This slogan represents everything that many have been working towards for the past 10+ years, and one of the reasons that Council has strongly supported Lakeview and made it a priority, knowing the substantial amount of jobs that it will create, not just to St. Albert, but for the entire region. No longer is Lakeview just a name on a report or a distant concept that is still in the planning stages. It has come to fruition and is now a reality. Signs like this are visible along Ray Gibbon Drive with future marketing messages that will convey not only employment, but development opportunities and highlight sectors that will ultimately build and innovate here. In addition to the Lakeview Business the signs, a Lakeview Business District website, I was going to say soon to be launched, but as of 10:30 last night, it is now live, so that's amazing. It will provide a central hub for our industry to navigate processes and to find specific information about Lakeview. In closing, I will leave you with this. The future, it's here for St. Albert right now. We have a strong mix of housing options that will support residential attraction, advancing our future employment needs and further growing our local workforce. We are seeing unprecedented numbers in residential and commercial sectors, which is enhancing the need of needed housing and amenities that will satisfy our growing community. And the launch of a sizable industrial development that will offer a competitive, unique business environment with accessibility to market. And it's poised to be the premier employment hub of the region. We are certainly fulfilling our vision of being Alberta's best mid-sized city for investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. All right, I think it is becoming, I was going to say more and more clear, but I think it's becoming clear. St. Albert is no longer a bedroom community. It's a complete mid-sized city that continues to see strong development and a growing workforce. I'd like to take a moment to just thank our small but mighty economic development team, along with all of the city staff that helped make this event possible. So if I could get our team to just stand up and give a wave, and yeah, let's give them a round of applause. I told you there would be a few self-indulgent moments along the way here. I always like to say that economic development is a team sport. Creating a thriving economic landscape that supports local businesses takes dedication from our entire organization. And the city is incredibly fortunate to have staff who understand the vital role that local businesses play both in our economy and in our community. I'm thankful for their commitment to making the City of St. Albert a welcoming and business-friendly city. All right, our closing act. For our closing act today, I'm excited to introduce our panelists and our host, who will provide us with their perspective on why the future is here in St. Albert. Rebecca Garby is a seasoned corporate and commercial lawyer with over a decade of experience at an international law firm. Since joining Lift Legal, located here in St. Albert back in 2018, she has been dedicated to providing approachable, high-quality legal advice tailored to Alberta businesses. She also serves on the board of directors for the St. Albert District Chamber of Commerce. Chris DeLaba is the manager of placemaking and entitlements at Rohit Group of Companies, the developers behind St. Albert's Churro neighborhood. He's a professional planner with over 2 decades experience in land use planning and real estate development. Chris is also currently co-chair Business Development Edmonton with the Urban Land Institute Alberta chapter. And Kaylin Anderson is the CEO of Build Edmonton Metro. Prior to joining Build, she served as the former CEO of the Urban Development Institute Edmonton Metro and was a senior leader with both the National Capital Commission and the City of Edmonton. Last but not least, Dan St. Pierre, our panel host, is the Manager of Business Retention Expansion with our Economic Development Department. His team helps businesses start, grow, and increase their competitiveness. So please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage.
Awesome. Little reverb there. Okay. How's that? A little better? A little worse? A little better? A little worse? Oh. How about if I stand here? Okay. I'm going to start hawking furniture now on behalf of the City of St. Albert. Thank you. Yes, as Mike mentioned, my name is Dan St. Pierre. I am the Manager of Business Retention and Expansion at the City of St. Albert, which is a bunch of sort of fancy language in a title that really means I get to go out and meet the businesses and the business owners that make it happen in St. Albert, and try to figure out how we can, as a department and as a city, support them to continue to build their businesses here, grow and develop here. I'm really excited to have this panel with us. And with all of the material, all of the action that's going on in the City of St. Albert that the mayor and Pat and everybody's talking about, we thought it would be worthwhile to have some discussion about why is all of this happening now? What are the implications of this for the future? And what's the runway for this continued growth? You know, Pat was talking about industrial vacancy and things like that. You know, is that an opportunity? I mean, I think we all are quite bullish on the fact that it is. We see what's happening with Lakeview. So thrilled to have this panel here because we've got a lot of experience, but we've also got some resident building a business in St. Albert experience. We've got development experience, and we've got this regional perspective. So I kind of just want to kick off, and I think maybe I'll start with you, Chris. We talked about record housing starts, over 1,300 housing starts. There's significant investment happening. Rohit is one of those companies that's making investments in this community. What do you think some of the unique strengths are that are actually driving this investment? What is drawing developers and others to want to make these investments in the city of St. Albert?
This thing is on. There it is. I think you have to have a proactive administration and council to make that happen. We hear a lot from the elected officials talking, we're open for business, we're encouraging more businesses to open up and call St. Albert home, more development. That's one part of the trickle down that goes through administration that are the ones actually moving the levers. And if you have a message from the leadership and it's not necessarily being followed through administration, you have a problem. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if we're coming in to invest, especially in real estate development, it takes time. I mean, by the time you see a house occupied, there's years of planning, engineering, investment, and risk that we take on to get to ultimately providing housing or that commercial property or industrial property. So you have to have a open for business mentality and message, and it has to sort of be one that also transcends political terms. I mean, 4 years in real estate development is not a lot of time, and so your administration are really the ones that are likely to be there for multiple political terms, and the ones that ultimately have to sort of believe in the community and provide that playing field that helps us take on those risks and see this as a positive place to invest.
I appreciate that insight, and I think the mayor talked about permitting and approval times here in St. Albert, and sometimes in our day-to-day when we're in the process of trying to get a permit or whatnot, things can feel tricky and there's questions and things, but in context of the region, I think it's really important to keep that in perspective. We're miles ahead of some of our counterparts, which creates a bit of a competitive advantage. I mean, Kaylin, from where you sit, you have this tremendous vantage point to get a sense of what's happening in and around the metro region. So, I mean, similar kind of question, but from that 10,000-foot view of the Edmonton metro region, how is St. Albert stacking up to some of our regional counterparts, and what is drawing people here?
Is this working? Yeah. Maybe I'll take your 10,000 feet and knock it up to 100, because I think that's where we have to start. This country is having a significant housing crisis and an affordability crisis. And so it's, as much as we might applaud ourselves in all of the regional municipalities in this region and in Calgary, the truth is a lot of it's based on economic migration from across the rest of the country. So that's sort of the table stakes. And I think that that's both a great opportunity for us, and it's also a huge risk. Because our city regions cannot house the whole country. So we really need the rest of the country to catch up. That being said, so now we've got this huge population growth, and within the context of Alberta, Calgary and Edmonton are taking the lion's share. There are many mid-sized cities in Alberta that ought to be growing really quickly, but are not. Not to pick on them, they're lovely places, but spots like Medicine Hat has been kind of hovering around the same population for a very long time. And so I think that the opportunity of the mid-sized city within the context of this province has nowhere to go but up from here. The big cities are attractive, but they also bring their limitations, and not everybody wants to leave where they're coming from to go to a city of 1 million to 5 million people, which is kind of what we're in the range of growing here in Alberta. So all that being said, once people move into this province for the opportunity that Alberta affords, and then they sort of make the big existential decision between like south and north or central Alberta, then they narrow in on our region, and then why are people coming to St. Albert? I think that's why we're here today. So within the context of this city region, I think St. Albert provides a really, really renowned quality of life. Mayor Heron talked about it. It's often in the top 10, the top 5, the top 2. It's a great place for people to live. It has not always been known as a great place for businesses to invest. It has been thought of as that bedroom community, and larger industrial areas within the region take more of that spotlight, whether it's the Heartland or Atchison. But I think that the moves that St. Albert is making right now to be more of a complete community will serve the future, not only of this city, but of this whole city region in this province. So I think, why would people be choosing to come here? Well, like, at the beginning, investors and talent are mostly coming because Alberta is a safe haven, and then within there, the Edmonton and Calgary metro regions are sort of the king and queen of the province in terms of those jobs and employment. But then within this region, I think that St. Albert has the opportunity to become anything that it wants to be, and that's both a risk and an opportunity as well, because you can choose your future, and making that choice is critical. And this is the moment to do it, because there's a ton of competition. I'm sure we'll get more to that in a moment, but at this point in time, if St. Albert wants to be mixed use, if it wants to be bigger, if it wants to have more population, if it wants to be more diverse, it can make those choices. But choices are what is on offer.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, particularly, you think about the proximity, the ability to have the amenities of Edmonton, Alberta's capital, and all of that has to offer. Professional sports franchise, big malls, whatever else. But the ability to sort of dip in and out of that as well. And you nailed it. That's this bedroom community concept, but that's shifting. And we're seeing more and more people choose St. Albert to build their personal life, but also make some investments to build a professional life as well. So Rebecca, you and your family moved to St. Albert. You are raising a family here in St. Albert with your husband, Mel. And you also started a law firm. And you started, if I'm not mistaken, Campbell Park, like the NABI facility, and went from shared office space. And now you're on the 6th floor of Taj with an office suite and employees. You're growing. So, we're talking about all of these elements that make this a great place to do that. Why are you doing that? What drew you to do that, and you and Mel to invest in your personal and professional life here in St. Albert?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say that I'm a super smart person and I did all the research and figured this all out and came here for that reason. I came here for a variety of reasons. I grew up near Vancouver, lived in Vancouver my whole adult life as a lawyer there. Never really thought that I would be living in Alberta or St. Albert. So, but in retrospect, it was 100% has been the best thing that we ever did. And so I guess I could comment on why that's worked so well for us, and why, I think it's going to work so well for others, and it makes perfect sense. So personally, like when we moved here, we were obviously raising a family here, so I guess that's the first thing I would talk about. I never thought we'd start a business here either. So, just in terms of that community, and I think you guys have been talking about it on a much more technical level, but just that I've never viewed it as a bedroom community, maybe because I did grow up in a true suburb. It feels like its own place with its own unique culture. You hear all about kids growing up today and how they don't kind of have that tether and that feeling of belonging and community, and my kids 100% have that. We live in Grandin in an infill, sort of a different type of development that's happening in St. Albert, and they roam the community. We have all of that sort of support. They're in sports and schools, and there's so many options here for them, and they're wildly different kids, and they all have a place here. And then when it comes to business, it is honestly, like, I was so happy to hear about St. Albert being in that top 10 for entrepreneurs, because that has been our experience. Again, we started the business more so for personal reasons, because one of our kids needed us to be closer, and being a lawyer can be a little tricky for long hours and things like that. So we just kind of went all in on St. Albert and started the business, and I can't say enough about the opportunities that we've received. NABI is one of them. I don't think we could have started with 0 clients and gone into a 5 to 10 year lease at top prices, and NABI gives you that mentorship and that opportunity to start somewhere. The chamber has just been this kind of built-in networking opportunity for us, and really the community as a whole. St. Albertans seem to like to support St. Albert businesses, so once they kind of know you've committed, people have come out of the woodwork. The vast majority of my clients now are St. Albert businesses. And we meet, you meet someone at your kid's hockey game, they find out you're a business lawyer, they're like, oh, I'd rather come to you than go to Edmonton. So it's just grown and grown so much faster and easier, really, than I thought it would. So I don't know if that answers it, but I would recommend it to anyone.
No, and I personally think that does answer it. And there's, a bit of a chicken and egg question in there as well, because it's, the jobs, and therefore we'll build some houses because people will want to live there, or people want to live here and then we'll look for the opportunities to have a job, make income, whatever in the region. So, I mean, Chris, if you think about the livability piece of St. Albert, right? And, it's this breakfast, we're focused on investment and growth from a business perspective. But in terms of that personal piece, that livability piece, that quality of life piece, the botanical arts city, like, how do you think that actually draws investment? How does that play into why St. Albert is seeing this growth?
I think a lot of it has to do with providing a certain lifestyle that people are looking for: good quality schools, access to good quality parks, access to good quality public services, rec centers, etc., access to good quality infrastructure. I'm going to say I think the biggest really linchpin to a lot more non-residential growth in St. Albert has been the Anthony Henday. And those types of infrastructure investments lead to other types of investments, whether it is the industrial side, commercial, residential. At one time, St. Albert was kind of this, I would call it a dislocated kind of bedroom community. It really was. You had St. Albert Trail that connected to the city of Edmonton, and it seemed far away. And then you had some non-residential development happening, with the Campbell Business Park and whatnot, but it was slow. And then the Henday, I think, was really the mechanism to leverage location. And I say that it's that, it allows St. Albert, I think, to leverage the quality attributes it has in the community by virtue of this big piece of infrastructure that has now created a more connected region. Leverage, what you have in Edmonton, which is access to a huge employment base. I mean, for these types of jobs in industrial, distribution, warehousing, logistics, access to employment is huge. And it's not, and I think that's one of the biggest pieces here that St. Albert can continue to leverage. And that's on the big infrastructure part. And then it really comes down to, again, to my previous comment on providing that path of call it least resistance and lower risk to get your entitlements. Many years ago, I think it was around 2009 or 10, I actually was working for Stantec, and we planned these lands well before everything went vertical here. And it's funny how long those investments take from when they're originally investment made by the developer, I believe it was Hopewell at the time, and us going through rezoning, getting in the services building, and ultimately going vertical takes time. And so I think that's one thing that you can't lose focus on is sit on our laurels. Oh, St. Albert's growing the right way, we're fine. Let's keep doing what we're doing. I think you always have to really be the ability to change and to be better because capital is fluid, investment is fluid, and it's easy for us to take ultimately our money if we feel that, St. Albert's getting more difficult, more cumbersome to get approvals. What is it for us to look in the southwest of Edmonton or Strathcona County or any other part of the region is easy to do. And that's just in the regional level. Never mind, you can pull that out and look at saying, well, maybe the Calgary region's better. And so again, not losing sight on what the good part of the communities are and how do you continue to foster that and encourage that continual reinvestment so you don't sit on your laurels and become complacency is, I think, the worst thing any municipality can do. Everything is fine. We're developing a great business park. Are all good. Do we really need to bend or look at things differently? And I think in today's world, things change very rapidly. And so just because you ultimately updated a zoning bylaw 1 year, 2 years, doesn't necessarily mean maybe we need to look at making some changes and tweaks based on where the market is going. Because again, the housing market is changing very quickly. The commercial market's changing quickly. Who knows what the implications will have on the tariff side in terms of what industrial land needs we had and or that product. And, do we shift? What is the implication of going east-west have versus the current north-south as it relates to trade? And what is that impact? And how can St. Albert leverage and take advantage of that? That was a bit of a long-winded response, but that's what I do.
I think that's, there's a lot in there, and I'm thinking about, so tariffs, maybe not tariffs, perhaps some tariffs, no tariffs. Like, we're in this yo-yo game right now. And, you know, business communities out here, there's nothing you love more than instability and uncertainty, right? That makes doing business great, planning great. But what I've noticed in our own election campaign right now, federal election campaign, I've heard the comment a few times, you know, we can't focus on what we can't control, we have to focus on what we can. And so, Kaylin, you know, there's been a few things, some changes in around the region. There's been a change in the regional governance model a little bit with the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board standing down. St. Albert has, you know, a significant amount of land banked. Moving Lakeview forward is, you know, it's 10 years in the making, but it's something that is in our control to an extent to develop. But I think, you know, I'm interested, I think, a little bit in your perspective around how something like Lakeview becomes fundamentally important, knowing, as Chris just mentioned, the job's never really done. So, like, even when Lakeview is finished and fully sold and built, we're on to the next thing, and we've got to be 10 years down the road in our thinking. But with the changes in the regional sort of governance model, big developments like Lakeview now launching to the public, you know, how do you think that's going to change the way communities like St. Albert actually develop?
Well, I would say that regional planning and regionalism in this province are always swinging on a pendulum. I think many will remember Klein canceling the regional commissions back in the 90s. Enough sort of struggle built up over time that it kind of almost demanded this collaboration in the bigger cities, and then that became a very, I think, fruitful EMRB process that lasted almost 2 decades. I think it had just had its 15th or 16th birthday, which is quite impressive. So all this to say, regionalism is dead, long live regionalism. It'll be back. It's always back, and it's always existing in some form or another. It's just where are we at this point in time? What will never go away is the need to collaborate and cooperate with your neighbors. I'm very heartened to hear from many of the CAOs that they are actively talking to one another. I'm sure Bill can nod, but yeah, they are working together. So just because this relationship doesn't exist as it did doesn't mean it's over. And of course, the mayors are doing their part, of course, with their councils. So there are some fundamentals to the regional kind of work that had happened over the last few years that I think will be very helpful. Were helpful to get to where we are and will be helpful in the future. Quite rightly, transportation systems and networks for economic development are table stakes, whether that's rail, major highway connections. So that kind of thinking regionally cannot afford to be lost, and I think there's a lot to maintain from the previous work that was done. Similarly, on the agricultural front, we have a lot of opportunity in this region to do that value-added work in the province. So there are ways to keep the regional connectivity alive in the most literal sense possible, and that'll be a matter of working relationships. There are some risks to losing EMRB. One of them was that everybody knew basically what to expect, what they were planning for, where they were going. And so I think that there will be some struggles, whether they're around opening up new areas that were maybe not previously contemplated, changing things that used to be taken for granted, like density targets. There could be some disagreements as we have to move into intermunicipal development plans and collaboration frameworks instead of relying on the growth plan. So those are some of the risks on the horizon. And then one of the upsides is competition is really good from a free market perspective. Again, risks and opportunities. So to Chris's point, not a time to sit on one's laurels, no matter which community you're in. The competition will be fierce, and it might be a bit more aggressive than you've been used to. So you can't take for granted that because the regional plan called you industrial X or residential Y, that might not hold. So that means that you have to have a really good sense of where you want to be, where you want to fit in, what your value add is, where your part of the market needs to be, and then you have to work your tails off to get it. And not to say that the region provided cover, but it kind of did in some ways. Like, everybody agreed to agree. Now, I know there were skirmishes behind the scenes, but in the front, the main headlines were agree to agree, and there was really good leadership there. So I think what we're going to see is city leaders working together to keep those fundamentals going together. So whether it's servicing strategies, transportation, all the sexiest parts of region building. Where does the poop go? Where do the trucks go? But really important. You're going to see a lot of collaboration on that, I think, because it's essential. I think that we will see some fighting, a little bit of that, some arguing. That's normal in any kind of make-up, break-up situation, which we are in a flux. And then we are going to see some fierce competitiveness that will result in some areas just absolutely driving ahead in very unexpected ways. Because one of the things about regional planning is it brings everyone up, but it also kind of flattens the game. And so now we can see some real spikes across the region. So I would say if there was a time for St. Albert to be circling its own wagons, getting really aggressive and thinking about what it wants to do, just go for it. Like, this is the moment. Doesn't mean you're bad neighbors, doesn't mean you're bad colleagues. It means you're still going to work on the fundamental pieces, but you don't need to wait, and you shouldn't think that your neighbors won't act in that way as well, because it's a very free market in this moment.
Okay. I just want to touch on something there with you and Chris again, and I have a question for Rebecca. So the mayor talked about West Area Redevelopment Plan, talked about updates and some modernization of the municipal land use bylaws and things like that. So in terms of momentum, talking about not resting on laurels, from your perspectives, both Chris and Kaylin, do you see that momentum in St. Albert behind making those right moves, continuing to sort of build on momentum, understanding that there's going to be iterative progression here? Do you see us continuing to kind of march forward?
Yes, I see that, and again, I hope it continues that way, right? I mean, that's one of the things is, if you're feeling good about yourself now, there's pats on the back. Okay, we made some major changes to our land use bylaw, or we've opened up these lands for development. We're good. Again, my earlier comment, complacency, in light of increased competition and other municipalities, again, becoming more aggressive, as Kaylin mentioned, in terms of attracting more investment in business. And so is that through a less regulatory environment, through a land use side of things, or fast track permitting? Again, risk mitigation strategies to ensure that if you're coming in there and in 60 days you've got a development permit, that's a big thing. And again, I think one of the biggest advantages some of these adjacent municipalities have is now that a lot of our boundaries have bled into each other, there's really no difference by the time you go west of Edmonton into Atchison or into Leduc County or into Strathcona County nowadays. It's just an artificial boundary that's aligned on a plan, but physically we don't know, other than you're now entering the city of St. Albert. I think it's taking advantage of what the mother city is, Edmonton, population, and the people there, and how can you tap into that, so you're not just thinking about St. Albert, we're 72,000 people, or Strathcona County is at 90,000, or 98, or over 100 now. But it's taking advantage of, well, there's 250,000 people literally within a 10-minute drive, and how can you take advantage of that and leverage it from a really kind of a non-residential tax and development and investment perspective?
I think St. Albert is on the right track for sure. I think St. Albert has taken some big swings, and tackling that non-residential growth piece head on through the Lakeview District, through the Anthony Henday Park that we're in right now. These are big moves, and they're important. So I think in some ways you can be incremental and improve, but that's not going to be good enough. Sometimes you're going to have to take the big hits. And I think St. Albert has been doing that. I think, not just because they're staring at me, but this mayor and council have been doing an astonishingly good job in terms of taking those risks, but being measured, but also not being complacent. So I think momentum's an interesting way of putting it, because momentum kind of implies some version of steadiness. I actually think we're going to see a lot more lumpiness in the future, and so I think some brave moves need to happen, and I think St. Albert's going to be on the right track to do that. So don't be afraid to keep doing it.
Yeah. All right, so headed in the right direction, but the jobs, you never check the box. We're always trying to move forward and progress. So Rebecca, this brings up something that I think is always a really delicate dance for any city council, any city administration, and it's, you know, it's discussion point here in St. Albert too. There's this push-pull between the amount of development that we want to do, because we do want to diversify our tax base, we want to spread out that cost of running St. Albert across different players than just residents through property taxes, but then you also have a community that's built up over a number of years that takes a great deal of pride in, you know, the green spaces and the trails and the trees and those kinds of things. So there's always this push-pull. So from your perspective, you know, sitting on the Chamber of Commerce, advocating for business, being an entrepreneur yourself, and a resident who takes advantage of that quality of life stuff, you know, how do you see that dynamic between we've got to grow, but we have this culture here that we also want to honor?
Yeah, I mean, I'm by no means an expert on these things, but I think they're definitely, there is a push-pull, but I think that they can work together. And I think that's something that sometimes there is a disconnect between the business community and all of the goals that they have, and then our regular community members who just want St. Albert to continue to be this amazing, unique, perfect place to live, with all the pools and all the parks and the walking trails. And I, for sure, on my parent family side, want that too. And I think there's really interesting statistics out there in terms of that many of you know way better than I do, but just in terms of St. Albert needing that tax base and not having it nearly at the level in terms of the industrial tax base that other municipalities around us have. And I think maybe that education piece is important in terms of our community members really understanding that it's not just about big business coming in, or, you know, some green space maybe being infringed upon a little bit, although I think that's being done really responsibly. It is about needing those two things to work together so that we can continue to have this incredible community and all of these resources available. But I think if St. Albert's going to be that attractive place that I think it should be to all of the residents of BC and Ontario that are tired of their situations there, I think it could be the poster child for movement in terms of what I know, in terms of the places I've lived in Canada. It does need to keep that thing that makes St. Albert special, right? Like, people talk about paying a bit more in taxes in St. Albert, but I think for the most part, they feel that they get something in return for that. So your regular resident needs to still feel that way. And, you know, maybe they can if we've worked kind of alongside business to build those industrial parks that we need.
No, and I think that's, you know, it comes up a fair amount, and, you know, there's always a delicate balance. How much do we invest front end against, you know, how much do we borrow? So, you know, I think your comment about seeing St. Albert do that balance well, doing this development responsibly, you know, I think it's a message that needs to be kind of on repeat in and around the community, because it is happening. So I think in terms of thinking just about the people perspective a little bit, you know, we envision St. Albert in 2030, you know, and this is for everybody really on the panel. What do you see the biggest opportunities for sustainable growth and prosperity in St. Albert? I mean, it's a big question, but we've got these elements that are in place. You know, we've all acknowledged that council's made the right moves around some regulatory things. We're seeing that record investment happen in the city, so the private sector's coming to the table. You know, what is the path to 2030 look like from your perspective, 2035? You know, and Rebecca, kind of from resident business owner perspective, your livability of the city, what you want St. Albert to be, but then just from this regional interconnectivity piece, you know, the residential build piece, you know, what does success 10 years from now look like? So maybe that's like a huge question, but I'll throw it to Chris because he gives very long answers.
All right, buckle up, everybody. Here we go. I think it comes down to, you know, continually to be competitive, and that can be done in many ways. I think in St. Albert case is, I think don't be afraid even to look at partnering more with the private sector. I mean, whether it's for investment in your industrial parks, business parks, redevelopment of some of your existing neighborhoods, which again, to Rebecca's earlier comment, she lives in an infill in an older community, and I think that is something that you're going to continue to see as St. Albert continues to grow out. It's also going to grow up. I mean, you're going to see a lot of people looking at reinvesting in some of these wonderful older communities, and that can be a challenge. Growth doesn't necessarily just have to take place outside, and that's where the municipality can partner and build new rec centers, but also how can you take advantage of really using the speed and the velocity of the private sector to unlock and untap some of your potential, whether it's sort of new land areas or redevelopment areas. That really is a big thing. Oftentimes we've seen municipalities take the very closed approach, like, well, this is a public benefit, so we'll manage it internally and then let the private sector invest and really unlock that potential. And I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities to partner with the private sector. And I think, in fact, you're going to see a lot of that. And to Kaylin's earlier comment about other municipalities taking bold steps to become more competitive, I think you're going to see some of them do that, saying, why not work with them? Allow them to kind of really push this past the goal line and get us what we need from whether it's a large distribution logistics thing, whether it's even some of your healthcare facilities and that sort of thing. I mean, and I'm going to talk a bit about Rohit's involvement with Covenant Health and the development of the South Health Campus. It's those opportunities that I think municipalities and even the public sector in general can really start to look at, is these creative partnerships. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do that. In fact, I think if you want to see things happen quickly, that's really one of it's a low-hanging fruit thing, because I think you have a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in the real estate and the investment side, saying, yeah, we'd love to work with you. I mean, we're making a big investment in the community, especially if you're a developer that's been around and you've got roots in this community and you're here for the long game. You're not here to do one and done. It's looking at being strategic and continually have that positive dialogue with those that are making those investments in the community, and seeing how you can untap some of the potential that the municipality has in terms of the tools in their toolbox, at the same time with the private sector and what they can do, and really, I think, have a win-win for municipality, for the community, and for the business and investment community.
Yeah. Kaylin.
Okay, I think the story over the next 5 to 10 years for St. Albert is going to be about population growth. And I don't think it's going to be this gentle rain that we've been experiencing for some time. St. Albert's population growth is percentage-wise is way under what the rest of the region is. And some of our neighbors are growing probably almost way too fast. But all that to say is that if this region continues to grow at the pace it's growing, and even if St. Albert's percentage share didn't increase, which I think it will, I think we're going to see a lot of change a lot faster than a lot of people have experienced. So buckle up for those really uncomfortable conversations about intensification, about totally new housing forms, about mixed-use development. Definitely applaud the major industrial work, but the future of non-res is also mixed-use urban. That will become a big deal. So I think that my bulk of my own personal professional experience was in Edmonton. I worked on the city plan, a plan to grow from 1 to 2 million people over the next 45 years. We were meant to grow from 1 to 1.25 million in about 12 to 14 years, and we're almost there in just over 5, which is terrifying. It's actually too fast. So when you get that pace of growth and that population influx, you have to channel that energy in a really positive way and also have the courage. The business community is going to have courage. The council and administration are going to have courage. It's not going to be easy. But I do think that all things being equal, again, back to my point at the beginning about the national, it's almost like water. There's a gravitational pull here. So we can be as excellent as we are. Good for you for being 10th best in the country, but the Globe and Mail is going to get picked up by a lot of people in a lot of provinces, and they're going to come here, which is great. So I think the challenge will be addressing the change much more rapidly than you might have hoped to have the luxury of time to address. That would be my caution, but also my encouragement to this community, because I think when you have something great, which you do, other people are going to want a piece of it. So from a business point of view, that's awesome. From a tax diversification perspective, that's excellent. I think the culture change piece is going to be where the biggest pain points are going to be. And I would also, maybe as my last kind of thought here, I would also say I love the Edmonton region for its distinct communities. I love that we have not amalgamated. You know, I lived in Montreal for a while where they're de-amalgamating. Never de-amalgamate. That's like a divorce on just of epic proportions. We've seen what's happened in other cities. I mean, Calgary's had a habit of just annexing its neighbors until everything is Calgary. One of the cool things about our region, in our attitude in this region, is that we do have all these distinct communities. So as this big population growth happens, St. Albert has the opportunity to further define itself, not to become more mushy or more blended in, but to actually have a crisper point of view. And I think that's such a positive upside. And I think we should every one of our communities should be leaning into that. I personally don't really want to see a big mushy Edmonton region. I think there are personalities and character traits of all these communities, and that's one of the best things about our region, is that if you want to live a more rural lifestyle, you can, a hyper-urban one, a more suburban one of this type or that type, you can currently make those choices, which is not something I feel is really the same in Metro Vancouver or the GTA. And keep in mind, those are the regions to which we ought to compare ourselves as a group, not our other counterparts in Alberta. It's those big five, big six. So buckle up for growth, but be distinct. I think I really would hope that for St. Albert in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Municipal mosaic, right? Right, with a cultural mosaic, right? That's municipal mosaic, isn't it?
I'm sure the acoustics in here are tough. I'm sure everybody's laughing at every joke. We can't hear it up here. Rebecca, from your perspective.
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, we're good. I think what Kaylin said is, you know, a much more articulate way of saying exactly what I think I feel and many of us in the community feel is, you know, our hope would be that how does St. Albert stay St. Albert, this distinct, real community where everyone is welcome and you know, we are our own place. And how do we keep that going over the next 30 years or, you know, whatever we're kind of looking at, and have this rapid growth and not do what, you know, we see other communities. I mean, my comparisons are always to BC, but I spend a lot of time in Kelowna. I mean, there's just so many lessons of what not to do there. And so the hope would be that we, you know, we're learning from those experiences and maybe not doing those things. I think a lot of it, though, is this love that many long-term St. Albertans have for their community, and how do we marry that with it can't look exactly the same in the future, and diversity of housing, I would think, is key to that. So how do we make sure that the people, you know, that we build these new businesses and that people in St. Albert actually can work in those businesses? So what kind of housing do we have for the people that may work in those industries? You know, and just our elderly community, all aspects of our community, how are we going to keep growing and developing in a way so that everybody stays here and, you know, can be cohesive in that way? I don't know what the answers are to that, but that's what I would like to see happen.
I mean, with all things, right, there's a delicate balance. We've already been talking about that. It's sort of a theme here. This delicate balance between, you know, the regulatory environment that's about public safety and public good against the speed with which we want to see investment and development happen to make things, to accelerate that growth process, diversify that tax base, but then while also maintaining this thing about St. Albert that has caused it to grow to 75, 76, 77,000 residents, on our way to 100,000 over the next 10 years. I'm going to end with one question, because we spend a lot of time, I think, in this sort of public discourse, there's a lot of conversation about what can the city do for us, what can governments do for us. You know, my experience in Edmonton recently is people like to take the picture of litter on the ground next to a garbage can and put it on Instagram and say this is outrageous, rather than when I was a kid, my parents saying, you know, you just pick it up, put it in a garbage can, the litter is handled. So we spend a lot of time talking about what is government going to do for us to make these things happen. Let's flip it. You know, what's the private sector's role in this? You know, where can the private sector come to the table to move action on some of these key things? I mean, Chris, you were starting to touch on some of that in terms of the public-private partnerships that could exist or could develop. But, you know, what's the private sector's role in helping achieve this vision of St. Albert?
Speed, right? I think that's it. I mean, you know, anybody who's developed real estate understands interest accrual doesn't stop. Every hour, every minute, every day it accrues, and when you're taking out significant amount of financing, not only that financing has to sort of get you from approvals, but it's also you got to weather the storm through the ups and downs of market cycles, which is why often you do see the private sector able to leverage their speed, right? You know, I think that's one of the big advantages here versus sometimes getting mired up in some of the minutia and just losing track on achieving a goal. And yeah, to my earlier comment, I mean, I think that's one of the ways of actually allowing a municipality, you know, such as St. Albert to grow in the way it wants is to, I mean, I think we all understand that it's not like, you know, change is expected. I think people, you know, nothing is just going to stay static. We like St. Albert how it is. That's just a very unreasonable expectation. It's a matter of, well, what type of change do we want? And does that type of change, you know, how does it work? The change that those who are investing in our community, the developers, the businesses, and the people, how do we marry that so we're on the same page so that ultimately we're facilitating that change in the right direction? And you know, things happen a lot quicker than they used to. Again, things just happen very, very, very quickly, and you can't, again, get too complacent and sit on your laurels and say, well, we've been a good community, look at how well we've done, pat ourselves on the back and continue doing that. Because again, investment will move to where they feel they're going to get a return, and that return comes in many ways. It's a return on your investment, the risk profile of that investment. Is it the right, you know, end user that you're ultimately attracting? And you know, you really do need the municipalities on board to help clear through to help you de-risk it. Because again, you can move on and find other places to invest and do your business. And so again, as much as the advantages are sometimes of being part of a bigger region and the lines of the sand are blurred, can be a disadvantage by virtue of just the increased competitiveness.
Okay, maybe I will contradict Chris just to make it spicy right at the end. I think what the business community can do is double down on St. Albert and be really bold about you're going to invest here and you own this place. And you're going to run it, and you're going to be philanthropic in it, and it's your home, and it's your future. So what can the business community do for this city? It can love this city, and it can put its money there. And I think that we see that, but I think that the more that, you know, we raise our own barn here in St. Albert and in this metro region, which is the most northern big city on the entire continent of North America, like there's not a lot of help coming anytime soon or quickly. We are pretty far north. We have to invest in ourselves. We have to be local while understanding that we are hyper connected to the world, and you know, through the port of St. Rupert, we can actually get ships from Asia and into our, you know, system of trains within a matter of days instead of weeks through Los Angeles. Malcolm Bruce always talks about this, and it actually astonishes me every single time I hear it, that we are as far north and as separate as we are on a map. If you actually look at the globe, we're really in the middle of the action. So I think we have to have a hyper-local committed mindset while being cognizant of our global, literally our global connection. And then with that kind of attitude, I think that's how the business sector can lean into helping our community thrive. Flourish.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I could contradict you to further the spice. No, I think just flowing from that, I think that's exactly right. And I think we see that happening in our community here in St. Albert all the time. I am active on the chamber. That's just a perfect example of how they're bringing the business community together to just act as this very, we have all these networking opportunities out there. This is just a very easy, homegrown way of networking amongst other businesses, helping other businesses. I've experienced it personally, opening a business here, just how welcoming the business community has been, how much people are willing to give you a leg up, or even in St. Albert, our local law firms, like we all refer work together. We all work to support each other in terms of where our different levels of expertise are. I think you see it, and at the grassroots level, which is all I can really comment on here. I think that is the key. There's, yes, we rely on our government for many things, and we need to advocate to our government for the things that we think our business community needs, but we also have a lot of resources to turn around and donate back to our community and help our community be what we want it to be, if we're so interested in doing that. So, yeah.
I love it. We're like right on the nose there, Mike. So everybody give a round of applause, please, to Rebecca Garby, Kaylin Anderson, Chris Dalaba. Thank you so much. Great conversation. I'll toss it back to you, Mike.
Oh. I'll say that publicly into the mic. Thank you all for joining us today and sharing your insights and thoughts. I think there was a lot of food for thought. I was actually jotting down quite a few notes while you were all speaking, so I may, not saying I'm going to steal your ideas, but I may borrow some. I'll give them back, but I'm just going to borrow some of those ideas because there was a lot of great ones there. So we're nearing the end of our program. I'll just mention, if your schedule permits, we invite you to stick around and network with folks in the room. Our economic development team will be here, so if you have any questions for them, we're happy to answer those. As you head out today, I do invite you to take the flower arrangements on your table. The arrangement should be awarded to the person at your table that was born the closest to the date July 3rd, 1985. July 3rd, 1985, which of course is the day that Back to the Future was released. The DeLorean that Mayor Heron traveled back from the future in has been generously donated to our event, free of charge. But for those who are interested in taking a picture of or with the DeLorean, oh my goodness. I did not know that was happening, but that is great. Doc Brown does insist that you do not touch or try to sit in the DeLorean, but we welcome you to take pictures. I hope you found the program interesting and insightful. I hope it provided you with the opportunity to make a new connection or reconnect with an old one. Thank you for joining us, and remember, the future of St. Albert, it's here.
I told you how I felt, told you what I want. You said I'm out of line, that I'm falling apart. You left me in the cold, now I'm lost in the dark. I gave you all my love, but you gave me slack. You said you wanna see me, but didn't text me back. You played your little games, had me off the track.
I hope it provided you with the opportunity to make a new connection or reconnect with an old one. Thank you for joining us, and remember, the future of St. Albert, it's here.
Think about a time when I called you drunk. I told you how I felt, told you what I